Hey everybody, Truck Boss Show at the Boss 90 Exchange here at the Great American Truck Show, where we want your voice to be heard. We've got a great panel of guests here that are here to talk about the topics of the day, and I'd like to introduce them to you now. We're going to start over here with Mike Landis with the USTA. Mike is an independent trucker who has been involved in going up to Washington every couple of months now to try to, actually monthly, right?
Yep,
to try to
that's
get
right.
things done. And next to him, we have Mike Jenga, representing Seagate Trucking, Seagate Freight. Next to Mike, we have Andrea Marks with TruckerNation. Andrea is a regulator, a regulation writer, who's also from a trucking family. We have Ingrid Brown, the voice of safety, the face of safety for FMCSA. She's an independent trucker. She is the Rolling B LLC. We have Joe DiLorenzo with the FMCSA. We appreciate you being here, Joe. And we have Tony Justice, who is also with TruckerNation, independent trucker.
No, company driver, actually.
Company driver,
Yes,
okay. Very good. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to get us started with some questions. We're going to have a conversation here. And I think the format we've got is going to be, I'm going to be throwing out topics for conversation starters and then stepping back and hopefully letting you all have a civil discussion. If it gets heated, I'll hose somebody down. I've got one of those little spritzers like you use for cats. And I'll spray you all down if it gets out of hand. But I think we're all on our best manners. So let me start out with one program note. For those of you listening from home, online, or here in the audience, we do want your voices to be heard. It's very important. I'm going to be monitoring here on my cell phone. And as your questions come in, we're going to try to work them in and get them to the panelists. All right? So first of all, we're going to start off with a topic that's been all over GATS today, and that's going to be the hours of service. And I'm going to start with Joe to talk about the recent change that has been put out for discussion. The discussion period is open through October 7th. And I want you to tell us a little bit about the changes, and then tell us about why those changes were needed and what they mean for truckers.
Sure. Thanks for easing us right into this conversation. I appreciate that. But just to kind of talk, I'm actually going to maybe take your questions in reverse and talk a little bit about how we got here and why, and then what these changes are and how it impacts, sort of what's come up. Really, over the last 2 years or so, we've had a lot more discussions between FMCSA and various people in the industry, including the folks here on the panel. And a lot of those discussions had to do with how the hours of service are limiting in their terms of flexibility. I had some conversations earlier here at GATS where we talked about the fact that the hours of service rules we're under right now were written in 2003, and a lot has changed since 2003. Just-in-time delivery, the way that traffic is, things like that. And what we were hearing was we need some more flexibility in those hours of service. We're all still concerned about safety, but we want to find a way to make things a little bit more flexible. So with that, we published what we call in regulatory speak an advance notice of proposed rulemaking about a year or so ago. We actually had a listening session on the ANPRM here at GATS a year ago and asked some questions about the different areas that folks might be interested in changing and how those, how we might go about doing that. So actually just earlier this week, we published a notice. And in that notice, we made 5 proposals, really, to try and address the situation of how can the hours be more flexible, along with while we're still able to maintain the level of safety that we have. So just to quickly touch on those, one of those is the famous or infamous 30-minute break. And we made a proposal in this notice to allow that 30-minute break to be on duty time. That was probably the most important change. So if a driver is stopping for fuel and food and whatever, they can count that with their 30-minute break, and it'd only be necessary after 8 hours of driving. We also made a couple of proposals related to some of the more kind of niche parts of the regulations. One we call adverse driving conditions, to allow a little more time when things don't go the way they were planned, which is one of the issues that often comes up. The third is what we call the short haul exemption, where under today's rules, there are drivers within 100 air miles and 12 hours of driving are able to not have to fill out a logbook or have an ELD. And that was really the change we made there, was to go to 14 hours and 150 miles. That proposal was written in a lot of ways to be consistent with the current 14-hour drive time that truck drivers have. And then the last two provisions go together, really, in my mind, because they were about flexibility. Rather than having a straight-up 10 hours off with the 14-hour rule, there's a split sleeper proposal that allows for either a 7-3 or an 8-2 split of that 10 hours that wouldn't count against your 14-hour clock. And the last one is what we call split duty as opposed to split sleeper, which basically allows for up to a 3-hour pause in the 14-hour day, followed by a 10-hour break. So the idea here was we took all of the ideas, we took all of the input that we got over the last year, put a proposal together to try and address those issues of flexibility, and now we're in what I probably consider to be the most important phase of this process, which is now that you all have something concrete to look at, tell us what you think and tell us how we ought to go forward.
Well, Joe, thank you, and thank you for coming. I mean, that's one of the things we hear a lot about from the truckers and our audience at the Truck Boss Show is they want to be heard, and sometimes they don't feel like they're being heard in D.C. And the fact that you're here means a lot, I'm sure, to everybody here and to our audience. Andrea, I'd like to throw it to you next because I think you are somebody who writes these kind of regulations, and I think you had something to do with helping to shape this particular change, didn't you?
Yeah, so professionally, I work for the United States Department of Agriculture. I'm not here in any capacity in representing the agency in that way, but I do work for a regulatory agency and have been through the rulemaking process many times. And in addition to that, my husband and I are small business owners. We own a small trucking company, and my dad and brother do as well. So I bring what I consider a little bit of a unique perspective to really the whole process in understanding how regulations come to be, understanding the lengthy process that it takes for regulations to come to be, but then also I understand what it's like to be a industry stakeholder on the other side of the table. So with the efforts that we put forth with TruckerNation, we were able to put together a petition for rulemaking that was accepted as part of the ANPRM, was considered as part of the ANPRM, and myself and Tony Justice and the rest of us at TruckerNation worked hard to ensure that we put together something that represented what our membership wanted, what the complaints we were hearing, but also really took into consideration the stipulations and really the constraints that the federal agency had to also consider when making a rule change. So we've been really glad and happy to have been part of the process and have folks at the agency now being so willing to listen to us, being so willing to hear the things that we had to say and really assist us as an industry in getting where we are in the rulemaking process.
Now, you told me in our conversation earlier that the way you got into this whole process and the reason you started TruckerNation was because you were in D.C. and you came upon a bunch of truckers with megaphones just pretty much locked out of the halls of power, screaming at buildings with megaphones. Mm-hmm. And Tony, you were one of those angry truckers at the time.
Yeah, it's when you're not correctly educated on processes, and I had no idea what I was doing when it comes to regulation, and a lot to learn. So it's easy to jump to that when you don't have the answers. When you're irritated, you feel like you're not being as safe as you could be because of some of the restraints that were on us. We all want to do our jobs. When we feel best rested and when we feel conditions are safest for those traveling around us and ourselves. And we just kind of feel like we was a little restricted, on some of that. So, I personally wanted to go to Washington and meet these guys and just see what it was all about, and didn't have any clue what I was doing. And lo and behold, thank goodness Andrea come along and Ingrid even come along was out in a while, and some other folks, and we just really started digging in and educating ourselves about the process, and Andrea was very instrumental in helping us do
So
that.
do you feel like you were being heard on this issue of hours of service at all?
Absolutely.
And let's be real, are you happy with these changes? Is this what you wanted? Did you get everything you wanted, or is there more that you need?
You know, I'm pretty happy with them as far as, you know, we just started communicating with these guys for, 2 years now, probably, what I would call constructive, communication and talking to them and talking about different ideals. And they've been very open-minded. You know, I've seen this agency with Ray Martinez at the helm really make efforts to come to the places for their, their public comment things, the listening, what's it called, the listening sessions. You know, they came to the Guilty by Association truck show. You know, you hear a lot of the drivers say, well, they do all those like in downtown D.C. or downtown, Las Vegas. We can't get trucks down there. We can't participate. And so they crossed that barrier and actually came to places where we could get to, so that we could be heard. Because I mean, one of their main goals is to try to achieve the ultimate, the best highway safety as possible. And I think that's ours too. You know, when our families are the general motoring public, so we're not going to push for anything that's going to endanger our families that's driving around the commercial vehicles when we're 500 miles away. You know, we want to make it safer, because if something happens to one of our family members, we may get back, we may not get back in time. Who knows? So now that people are starting to realize that, we are as serious about highway safety as anybody. We're not trying to cheat. We're just trying to keep some common sense behind the wheel.
All right. Well, it sounds all pretty good and friendly so far. I want to throw it down to the other end of the table, down here to Mike, because, when Mike and I were talking, he has a little bit of a harder edge in his beliefs on this subject, and I'd like to kind of give you a chance, Mike, to express your thoughts on where we stand and where you think we should be versus, first of all, tell us what you think of what's on the table, because that's what the next 45 days is about, and then tell us where you'd like it to go from here.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think when we first heard the announcement of what the hours of service change were going to be, there was a lot of mixed emotions flying around by everyone right away, because they didn't quite understand everything to a T, and everyone's working on trying to get some clarification on that now instead of just some interpretation. And honestly, though, after you sit back and kind of examine a little bit and read through everything, it may not be exactly what everybody wants as far as complete flexibility. We at USTA put in an hours of service proposal too that had a few more different options in it. But in all honesty, I do believe that with what they're offering right now is a really big step in the right direction. The fact that they've even gone from not really wanting to entertain any type of flexibility to throwing out 2 different options or 3 different options with the 30-minute to 3-hour window to extend your day also is a pretty big step in the right direction. I think there's some other things there we could look at. I know they've talked about looking into studies on a 6 and 4 split, and also I think for team drivers, I've had some come up to me about that, a more even one like a 5 and 5, because when they want to go into, one's sleeping, one's driving, and they got to stop somewhere, they get this weird kind of time lapse thing, I guess you want to call it, where it's funky with a longer period and a shorter period. So I do believe it's a step in the right direction. It's nice and refreshing to see that something that so many of us have been working towards. I actually met Tony in October 17 down in D.C. with the megaphones and stuff like that too. So it's nice to see where we've come from there to here. And when we do it, we go to D.C. once a month, like you said, and we meet with FMCSA, and I'm sure Joe will, concur with this. I don't really write things knowing the process of government like Andrea does, because I don't know it, but I do it with common sense. I don't really care if it's a problem for them or not. I go down and make their life miserable sometimes. He'll tell you that. We've had some really good discussions, but I also have learned a lot on that end of things too. And it is nice to hear, that here we see a little product or light at the end of the tunnel or step in the right direction of those efforts come about.
Sure. Well, it's kind of like rocks in the tumbler. You need that grist to end up with the polished stones. There's a lot of friction in the process. It's not comfortable. Corners are getting knocked off. Sharp edges are getting ground down, and that's not a pleasant process. But now that you've been in the process a little bit, do you feel like you're being heard?
I want to say I feel like we're being heard a lot more than we ever have before. And that's really what got myself into this here, is the fact that from going down with megaphones and stuff like that and everything else, you realized, hey, there's really, even with like OIDA and some other stuff out there, there's really no one out there that was really giving a true driver's point of view, right? Or giving a true driver's voice. There's everyone at like FMCSA and in the government and Congress, stuff like that, that's coming up with these rules and regulations has absolutely zero experience behind the wheel of a truck. And I mean, I don't think anyone would expect someone in any type of business, not just trucking, but anywhere, to come in and tell them how to do their job when they've never done it.
Sure. You know, that's an important point, and I want to put a pin in that and hold me accountable to come back to that, because that's a separate topic we need to discuss today, which is the FMCSA advisory board and the role that truckers might play in that. So make sure we get to it. I want to go to Mike. I keep wanting to call you Alex because that's what your name tag says. But Mike, you started out in 2008 with one truck.
Yes,
And you now have almost 300 trucks at Seagate, right? And you're just up the road here in Grapevine?
correct.
So you've managed to be fairly successful at a time of dramatically increased regulation. You've been a small fleet. You're moving up into that medium-sized fleet now. What do you think of the current proposal that's on the table while we're talking about hours of service? And then we'll kind of come back to you from time to time as a fast-growing trucking fleet and see what you think you're not really one of the megas, but you've moved beyond what would be considered a small owner-operator. So give us your thoughts on the hours of service rules.
I think what have happened in the last 2 years has been critical. Just the growth path to where we are heading right now was pretty much created by the guys who went to DC with the megaphones, because for a long time nobody could hear us. Nobody gave us a chance to express our views, or even just come on the table to just have some input on what's going on out there in the work environment. So that said, I think we have a proper or a better channel of communication between us and what's happening in DC. And it's been a long way coming, but at this point, I feel that we have a good chance of getting the results of the things that we want, because we are the ones who are out there doing the job. But if we are working against FMCSA that is not willing even to consider what we are going through, life was a little bit harder for us as truckers, because growth depends on just creating an environment where everybody succeeds in their endeavors. So this is very critical for FMCSA just to give us that chance to just express ourselves. So bringing sanity in the industry is very important, and moving forward, we feel like the industry is going to even attract better talent if there's some flexibility on doing certain things in the industry.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to come to you next, Ingrid, but it sounds like y'all are saying that you're seeing change. And is that a function? I mean, we've had a change. The head of the FMCSA, Ray Martinez, he's been in there for how long now?
A little over a year.
A little over a year. So really, I mean, we've between TruckerNation and the USTA and some of the other efforts of truckers to come to Washington, I'm going to first I'm going to go to Joe, and then I'm going to come to you, Ingrid. Do you feel like the truckers are coming to you folks in a more organized fashion? They're phrasing, what are they doing differently that's helpful to you? And then what has changed administratively within the FMCSA that's making you more receptive, if you are more receptive to these ideas?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, because it's interesting to, those of us here have spent a lot of time together, a bunch of us anyway, over the last couple of years, and it's interesting because it definitely goes both ways. From my perspective, I've been sitting in this job that I'm in right now since 2011, and the first time anybody actually came to me to talk about this issue was 2 years ago. There was a lot of frustration out there, but I think there was we don't know how to hear it.
You didn't get my rock?
I missed, well, it's hard to distinguish any individual rock from all of the other rocks. But, I think that there was kind of we thought that we were communicating to the people that we needed to, but obviously we weren't. And I think the same thing was happening the other direction, was they thought they were communicating. And really, when we talk about this hours of service issue, we talk about the process, and Andrea's more process oriented, Mike not so much. I will confirm his statement on that. But the simple fact of the matter is that it was a year or so ago, or maybe a little bit more than that, when the first time somebody actually came and said, here is a proposal, we want to change the rule. So I personally think I never want to attribute where we are right now to any one thing. I think it was a lot of things. I think certainly the administrator has asked us to move very quickly and to be really open to things. But I also think we all learned something. We learned that, DC, whether you like it or not, we have to rely on associations. Okay, our agency is responsible for the safety of 550,000 trucking companies. That includes 3.9 million, almost 4 million CDL drivers. So I like to talk to people, but it's hard to talk to all those people. And I think we thought we were getting there, but what I heard a couple years ago at another truck show was maybe we weren't quite getting to that. And I think that especially the people here on the panel, but a lot of others also realized that, kind of as Tony said, we needed to all kind of move a little bit closer together, and we kind of needed to see that point of view. I think the industry and the drivers needed to see the fact that, to some extent, our hands are also bound by rules and regulations that we have to follow in order to change rules and regulations. So personally, I think maybe it needed to come to that point, where everybody was so frustrated, we all kind of realized that we needed to listen. I don't know what, but I think that a little bit of mutual understanding and, understanding of what all of our limitations are kind of is what brought us to kind of where we are right now, where, like I said, I've been in this job since 2011. I've been doing this in the government for almost 30 years, and I don't know that I've ever seen anything move as quickly as it has here. And that is a function of some changes in the administration and wanting to kind of move things forward quickly. So I think it's a lot of little things that bring you all to this point now where we can all sit here now and have a pretty constructive dialogue, disagree about some things, agree about some things, and kind of figure out, what the best way to go forward is.
Okay. I want to really quickly let Ingrid weigh in. You've been in the business now for how long?
Be 40 years in December.
40 years. So you've been a driver, owner, operator for 40 years.
Yes, sir. Pretty much so.
Okay.
The whole time.
So based on what you've seen over the years, how do you think relations are right now between your regulators and you as a driver and your industry?
This is the best that it's ever been,
Really?
ever had communication. When I started out in this, Tony and I have been friends for a long time. A long time. And I talked to Tony when he started this, and I worked with he and Andrea for a while as well, and with TruckerNation, and I work with USTA now. I was on their board, and I can see the difference of what the two associations do, two organizations. I can see that there is a difference between the two, and they do different things that both are contributing toward and bringing the communication about. The knowledge that I learned from Andrea through the process and learning the process of it was none above just absolutely amazing of what I learned about our government and how the process works. Going with Mike and them and going to DC and sitting down with these guys and that kind of thing has shown me too that it does. It takes every single one of us in every one of our capacities. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. The thing is I think that we can all agree that we've decided to take the strengths, throw away the weaknesses, even though sometimes we have those weaknesses because we're human, and work together to do that. But to do that, right here sits the common denominator of what we're all striving to work toward to get to do the best we can to work with them.
Well, thank you for that. And I understand that Tony is going to have to leave us early. The life of a celebrity trucker musician. But I wanted to ask you, while we've still got you here real quick, If you had anything else to say on the hours of service, but then, you and I had a conversation yesterday about this issue of the advisory board. And unless somebody else wants to talk about some more about hours of service, I'd like you to kind of kick off the discussion of the trucker voice in regulation, and your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew knows a lot more about that, but, as Mike alluded to a while ago, some of those different panels, to have the drivers input, bringing his experience, to those conversations. When you put regulation to reality, I think there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of really good intentions, but because they don't understand our job and some of the conditions we face, it's hard to set a set of hours to every day, because no 2 days are the same when you do what we do for a living. You have, everybody says, plan better, and it's great to plan, but there's so many things that can throw your plan off that it's just out of your control. And so to have someone on an advisory board that has that experience in the industry that you're making regulations for, I think is critical, extremely critical. To get someone in there who can communicate well with the agency, throw out some ideals that someone who hasn't done that, there's no way they could throw those ideals out there. So hopefully, as we move forward, I think every 4 or 5 years they appoint new people to the advisory panel, and we're raising our hand.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you for joining us. And if you have to make your exits, you can hang out as long as you can, and if you scoot off, we'll understand.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Well, good. And I've been incredibly rude so far. My name is Brad Kuhn, and I am the Senior Regulatory Correspondent for the Truck Boss Show. And I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, so my mama taught me better than that, so hi, everybody. To continue this discussion, as we let Tony sneak out, let's talk about, again, I'll come back to Andrea as a regulator slash trucker. What's your take on this? I don't know if the advisory board is the place we need to look, or what do you think the current situation is for truck regulation versus other agencies? You work in the Department of Agriculture, and I know you're not going to speak on behalf of the department. You're here as an individual. But tell us, based on your experience in Washington, what other agencies are doing compared to the way transportation is being regulated?
Well, I only have experience with 2 agencies, so USDA and DOT, but at the end of the day, government agencies by right and by regulation have the ability to have what we call an advisory committee. Many agencies do. And FMCSA has an advisory committee. It's a robust committee that makes up a wide gamut of the regulated community. People from insurance brokers to law enforcement officers, associations, lots and lots of different people come to the table. And it's definitely, like Tony said, something that we're going to raise our hands and say, we'd like a seat at that table. But the interesting thing is, we've created an environment now where that's not the only place where drivers or associations or anyone can have their voice heard. I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. If anyone listens to anything that TruckerNation puts out there, you've probably heard me say this probably 100 times, but we've never had an email go unresponded to. We've never had a phone call not returned from FMCSA. We've never had a meeting request turned down. So at this point, we know that it's important to put our foot forward when appointments for the advisory committee come available. But at the end of the day, we have a direct line of communication for people that we really feel like are hearing what we're saying, heeding our advice to the extent that they can, and turning that into regulatory action that we all can compromise about, we all can live with, we all feel like is good for our industry.
Okay. Well, y'all are being very nice, and that's a good thing. I'm going to take the gloves off here. I can take one for the team here, but I've got to speak to the elephant in the room here, which is when you walk around that floor upstairs, they're going to tell you that they think that the FMCSA is bought and paid for by the megas. Just truth. All right? And Mike, you're nodding. I mean, I take it you've heard that. Do you feel that way? I'm sorry, I was talking to Mike Jenga, and I'll get to you. I know how you feel.
Part of the painful process, getting here was how FMCSA was. We feel like big companies have better leverage, and what I mean by that is sometimes you'll find that they'll implement some new rules. They try out something, pilot it out, it works, then they go to FMCSA and pretty much drive it down your throat. So FMCSA will give big companies an ear because they have the capabilities. Big companies will circumvent everybody else. They'll circumvent OIDA and any other partners and just go straight and go to DC and lobby for stuff. Once they get it, they convince FMCSA it's a good deal for everybody. It covers everybody's in the house, and it's implemented. So what have happened in the past is they realized that not just big companies are the players in the industry. So at that point, then individuals and mid-level companies realized that we have to vouch for ourselves. So that's why you have to go to DC. If you go to DC, you're not gonna meet big guys like JB Hunt there. They got their deal, and they're hauling freight. So we feel that now we have a chance where everybody is coming on the table, and FMCSA is getting to where we wanted them to be. Mm-hmm. So at this point, we can attest to the fact that we are getting where the relationship is becoming cozy, and we are just bouncing off ideas on a level playing ground.
Okay. And Mike, Landis, I'm going to give you last word, but I don't want Ingrid to be last again this time. What are your thoughts on this?
As far as the driver advisory, I completely agree. Nobody that hasn't been in the seat of a truck, that hasn't traveled across this country, around this country, or slept in a truck bed for a week or 2 weeks at a time, or dealt with some of the areas in the country that we have to park where there's no parking in so many areas, to this kind of thing, can honestly get a grasp of understanding completely, unless they've done it. Mm-hmm. I think that experience speaks louder than data, than war stories, than what ifs or what coulds. I think they do the very best they can because they've been around it, they've witnessed, they've seen it, and they have common sense. Yeah. I'm not going to say I don't question it once in a while. Sorry. But I had to sit over here, didn't I? It just becomes a fact that without the experience, I think it's really lacking of what can come of decisions that are made. I think it's lacking of making decisions that need to be made because you don't know what the experience has brought other people and what the outcome can be.
Well, it's like the old story of the chicken and the pig involved in breakfast. The chicken is involved in breakfast. The pig is committed. That pig's not getting out of breakfast.
I'm hungry.
Yeah, but it's.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's a fact that somebody needs to be at the table. There needs to be experience at the table. There needs to be a level head at the table. There needs to be somebody that can work alongside them. And I think a lot of this is, and we talk about the mega carriers and where people think that, all the big money and they're bought off. And I mean, we hear the story over and over and over. Here's the thing. Those, they've been in DC. They've been on their own turf for all these years, and we're not there. I see it when we go to DC. Mike can tell you. We walk the halls, we go to senators, we sit down with them every time, probably more than they want to see our faces. But, it's like saying, this is my home turf, and then you have visitors that pop in, and then they leave.
You still feel like a visitor?
Nope.
No?
No.
You're starting to feel like you're not playing on home
No,
field, maybe?
I've been that way for over a year now with them.
Good.
Especially, yeah. I'm like Andrea. The phone doesn't ring or anything else that they don't Okay, Joe ignores me, but go ahead.
Well,
He doesn't
I do want
really.
to add something to this, though, because this is a good opportunity to talk about kind of the actual reality of this, right? I think there's two things to say here. I've seen more of the people on this panel in my office over the last year by far than I have with any other association or any large trucking company or anything along those lines. I mean, it's not even a question about that. I mean, when Mike says he comes once a month, he's not kidding. You know, before he leaves, he's like, I hope you're here 1 month from now at this time. And so, I mean, literally, I think this idea that, there's not an equal voice, I think is something that I hope we can move past, because, I mean, literally, that's the way that is. I mean, this is just, you look at my calendar, it's got TruckerNation, it's got USTA, it's got this driver, that driver, whatever. So the other group, I also think it's important to keep in mind that one of the other things we've talked about here is that, just kind of in my experience, this hours of service rule is the first rule that I could think of in a long time that was actually initiated within the agency. A lot of our instruction comes from Congress. And as an executive branch agency, that's who we are responsible to. So I think that everybody, has to realize that just like it's kind of this cooperative thing here with us, it's kind of how do we work with Congress? How do we do all of these things, together? But I do think that, I hope if nothing else comes out of this, that everybody realizes that this idea that one person, when we're making decisions about rules or we're making decisions about what's going to go forward, that any one person or any one association's voice matters more than another. It's just really not the reality. It actually never really has been. But I think that there has been this gap we started out talking about earlier in communication that some of these folks have filled, and I think that kind of makes a difference. But because we do kind of have to get that communication going sort of both ways.
Well, Joe, while you've got the mic, what can our audience and what can our panelists do to, in addition to what they're already doing, to make their voices heard? How can they, would it be helpful, or how could they get seats on the panel? When did these panel seats, the advisory board seats, come available, and how would they go about getting those positions?
Oh, I think they've all done more than enough. No. Yeah.
Ingrid's ready.
That's right.
She's got a travel bag ready.
You're not kidding. I know. No, all joking aside, I think that number one thing is the thing that I'm always looking like a bunch of years down the road. Like, is this going to actually move us forward? I said this to a couple people today. Everybody's got an issue to coalesce around right now, right? Hours of service or whatever. But how we got here was not kind of grasping that issue and not having a consistent set of communication over time. So the number one thing that I talk to these guys about all the time is let's keep doing this, and let's make sure we keep doing it after this issue, hopefully is resolved. Because if not, another 10 years down the road, we end up all back where we started again, and all the work and all the hard effort and all the aggravation that's got into it doesn't really last anymore. So I think, kind of to Andrea's point, that really is the most important thing. The advisory board, the Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee, is the committee that's being referenced, and when seats come open, obviously there's that option, but you don't have to have a seat on the Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee to participate in that. It's a public meeting. Andrea was referencing kind of the technical things that the government has to do to have a public meeting or whatever. Those meetings happen a couple times a year. They're announced. Anybody can participate, and there's always the opportunity for public comment. So I'm kind of more of the mind that look at all of the opportunities that are out there. Don't think that any one of them is going to be kind of the solution to whatever this problem or this perceived problem is. And it's just, participate in the process. This is how the government was designed to work. Whether you like it or not, it was designed to be deliberative, okay? And it was designed to not allow for, kind of quick and radical changes in regulation. And it was specifically designed to gather public input. That's why we have this multi-step process. And, you know, in rulemaking. And I think the only thing else that we can ask is just that we keep that participation going, and not only keep it going because we want to keep it going and we want it to be larger. You know, we got 5,200 comments to the ANPRM. As I said earlier, there's 550,000 trucking companies and 4 million CDL drivers. You know, we really want to have people engaged and know that they have a voice. Because if you don't believe it, like I said earlier, this is the best example of where a couple of groups got together and put in some petitions, and it may not be everything that everybody wants, but it at least initiated the change.
And Mike, you've been very polite down there. Wow, it sounds like an emergency broadcast system. The broadcasters in your area, in the event of an actual emergency. Anyway.
It's an Amber Alert. I was thinking tornado.
All right, now that
We're in
we're
the
done,
basement.
now that we're done with our Amber Alert, Mike, do you want to? You've held your tongue. You've been polite down there. I know that you have some strong feelings about the representation of independents versus the representation of the megas. And let me ask one question first. Joe, do you know what percentage of that 4 million you said of those drivers are affiliated with the big fleets versus independents?
I mean, I can give it to you more in terms of the companies, 550,000, whatever we're at, companies. 90% of those companies are 10 drivers or less. So a majority of the industry is small companies.
Okay, but in terms of the actual drivers, most of them do work at the big fleets, right?
I still don't know. Again,
CDLs.
I'm not going to say for sure, but if you do the math, there's still a really large percent of the industry that's associated with the independent, with the smaller companies. Even with the size of some of the large fleets that are out there, when you're talking about 4 million drivers. I don't know that off the top of my head. I'd have to do a little finagling of the
All right.
math to see, but.
Well, Mike, I didn't mean to step on you there. Why don't you go ahead and finally weigh in?
Yeah, no, that's okay. There's actually a couple things here I guess we should talk about. I guess I'll go back to what you originally asked about, you know, people being bought off and stuff like that. I don't really believe that the FMCSA is bought off, but it is DC, so I'm sure there's some type of back bar deals going on somewhere. But the one thing that I've learned, and when I said earlier I've learned a lot about this process since we've been doing this, is FMCSA is just kind of a small part of the wheel of how everything gets done down there. And Joe brought it up earlier about Congress and stuff like that. Not only do we meet with them, but we do go walk the halls of like the Rayburn building and stuff like that and meet with congressmen and senators and everything else. And that right there is really where you're going to find that kind of stuff going on, because that's where the lobbyists are going. And yeah, technically when we're doing that at USDA walking the halls, we're lobbyists too. But the reception we get is a lot different, because when they find out, oh, you own a truck and drive it and you're here doing this, it holds a lot more weight, I feel. And some of them you can tell that they've been gotten to and they don't really care. And some of them are interested because they don't have any clue, because when a lobbyist goes in there, they only know what the person that sent them told them. So when that senator or congressman you're talking to has a question above and beyond that, they don't know the answer to it. Whereas someone like myself or Ingrid or whatever that has the years of experience out here, we can answer just about anything someone throws at us when it comes to the industry. And I think the real enemy here, as Mike said, you don't see J.B. Hunt down in D.C. walking around, right? You see the ATA. The ATA is the biggest problem here, because they don't care about the drivers that drive for them big companies. They care about the dude that owns it, that's giving them their check. Case in point, like I said, I met Tony in October 17. We went down there with trucks to protest going against ELD. And we did it again in April of 18. Both times, ATA was in the Rose Garden with the president, with top brass of the bigger mega carriers. They have the ability to do that. And it's like Ingrid said, they've been down there. We are behind them in the times when it comes to doing that, because as someone like myself as an independent, I've just kept my nose to the grindstone trying to support my family and lost sight of that, in all honesty. And it took something like that to open my eyes, which is how USTA came about. So, I feel like there's definitely, like you said, there's some smoke and mirrors going on down there. But, hopefully with us, people like myself and Ingrid and Andrea and everyone, and people making the comments, it's giving us a voice. And, in all honesty, a guy from the ATA liked to call us amateurs a while ago, and I'd like to say to him that you're the actual amateur, because I'm pretty sure you couldn't figure out how to put my truck in gear and get it out of the parking lot.
Well, Mike, let's just kind of talk about that for a minute, the part that's within our control, because the ATA is going to, and the megas are going to serve their interests that they're interested in. How do folks like our audience and our panelists, how do you represent your interests and still pay the bills? I mean, you're out driving for a living, and yet you're making time, and Ingrid, same way, you guys are making time to shut it down and go to DC on a regular basis. How do you shuffle that? How do you cover those costs? And how would you encourage, talk to our people out there. We've got 41,000 people that connect with us from time to time through the Truck Boss Show. How would you talk to them? And Andrea, I know you've got some manuals you've put together on this, and so I'm gonna let them tell us, and then I'm gonna come to you.
Yeah, so in all honesty, the reason that I started this, or we're doing this, or any of us are doing this, is because this is how we support our families. When you see these regulations come down the pike, and you're a small owner operator like myself, I run my truck and I have a guy leased on to me, and you start seeing these kind of things that are going to really affect you, you start thinking about it. I'm a third generation driver, so I've been driving since I graduated high school. To me, this is a very personal problem, because now there's people coming in that either don't know how to do what we do or have other interests involved that are putting regulations out or trying to, strive for things to make it easier for the bigger companies to push us little guys out and make it tougher on us. Everything's getting more expensive, stuff like that. And I honestly felt we really don't have a choice. If I want to continue to do what I love to do and support my family, but have a life with them at the same time, something needs to be done. Someone needs to step up and speak up. And I wasn't really seeing that happening anywhere at the time. So I think that's kind of how all of us really got started in doing this. So to me, this is a very real thing to do. And to find that time, it's difficult, because I'll be honest with you, we go down to DC on average 2 to 3 days a month. And when the truck's parked, I'm not making any money. In fact, it's costing me money, because the truck's parked, we're going down, you're paying for hotels, food, you drive down, everything else. And we are a nonprofit, so we can collect donations, and we have a membership and stuff like that, and that's what we use to do that. We cannot pay ourselves back. We can't even reimburse ourselves for the time off work or anything like that, but that's our contribution to trying to give everyone out here that's doing what we do a voice, the drivers. It's not really just about for myself, not just an independent or anything like that, because when I'm behind the wheel of my truck, I'm no different than the guy driving a Swift truck down the road. I'm a driver, okay? I gotta follow the same rules, I deal with the same conditions, the same cars, everything else. So I try and look at it through that point of view, not just what's good for the independent, but what's good for the guys out here actually pounding the ground and running up and down the road. So, like I said, for me, it's a very real thing, and as much as it can be financially demanding to park the truck and take the time off, we have 2 guys on our boards from South Dakota, so when they would come in, they'd lose almost a week worth of work till they would load in, stay at my house over the weekend. We'd go down for like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It could be Friday till they're finding a load back out to go somewhere. And I think that's a very commendable amount of time and time off work once a month to put into fight against this stuff and give ourselves a voice to fight back against these big guys that are trying to ramrod us, really.
Sure. Ingrid, how do you manage?
Sir?
How do you manage to shut it down and get to DC?
The same thing. We're lucky enough that we are independent to where we, don't have to say, can I have time off, or, I need to take time off. we know in advance enough. Now we're going down and making it mostly on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, so we can meet with Joe and them. And we're at the Our Roads, Our Safety meetings on Friday of each month as we can. You know, it's passion. When you care about something enough, nothing will stop you. When you care about something enough, there's not anything that you can't figure out how to get it done. And we all know, and one thing that I know everybody that's sitting here with Andrea and Mike, you know, our families come first. We know that they're okay because we work hard and we make sure that comes first, but we make sure that anything that comes second, there's nothing that comes above what we're trying to do for our love and our passion in the industry.
Very good. Andrea, in terms of resources for folks, you've put together, the TruckerNation has a bunch of resources to help independent drivers get more involved.
Yeah. Well, before I answer that, something just kind of struck me as we were sitting here, you know, listening to everyone's comments. I can't be more honest when I say that I hope people didn't expect this to be a battle when we were sitting on this panel today, or it to be juicy in that we would be at odds with FMCSA. I cannot be more genuine, and I hope that the people watching understand that we really have turned a corner with the agency. We're not sitting here, I wouldn't turn the corner, I shouldn't use that 2 times in a row, but I wouldn't leave this room if Joe wasn't sitting here and say anything different than what I'm saying right now. I feel like that's really important for people to know. I'm not saying this because he's sitting here. I'm allowed to disagree with him. I'm allowed to not like the decisions that they make. And I've done that before. And I just tell them like a human and talk to them constructively and collaboratively and professionally. And that's all it takes. I'm not putting on a show by sitting here. It's important to know that we are going to a new place with the agency. We are getting to a place where these conversations can happen. And I know folks like the folks at TruckerNation, the folks at USTA, the folks at the other, you know, that are part of the other associations out there really feel that. And we just hope that not just independent drivers, but all drivers can feel that. And at TruckerNation, to get to your point, is we have created tools and resources so drivers can become their own advocates. We think that's really important because, well, recently I wrote a bit of a scathing, if you will, op-ed about why the megas, we like to pick on those, but why they count on the fact that we won't engage, we won't be our own advocates, that we won't go make public comments. They rely on that. They want that to happen. They want us to be silent. So I really hope that that makes people a little bit mad. I hope that that kind of gets people's bellies feeling away and maybe raises your blood pressure a little bit because it's the truth. They have people on staff that they pay to make public comments and to meet with the FMCSA, and by gosh, they don't have to worry about taking a week off work like the board members at USTA.
And that's beyond what the ATA does, because I mean, we haven't talked a lot about OIDA, but OIDA goes to Washington and they lobby.
Sure.
But what you're saying is that the big firms, in addition to what they pay to have the ATA do it, they all have their own team of lobbyists and K Street lawyers, you know, that are up there.
100%, and they rely on us being quiet. They rely on us being undereducated and not knowing the process and not caring because other people do it for you. So again, I hope that makes people a little bit mad. That's the whole point in saying this kind of stuff, because we want people to be their own advocates. And whether you're a part of TruckerNation or whether you're a part of USTA or OIDA, that doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, your experiences as a driver matter. Because back to Mike's point, when you're behind the wheel of a commercial vehicle, nobody cares what association you're part of. You're still just a driver. So getting involved, being your own advocate, having a direct line of communication to the regulators is so important. So at TruckerNation and our effort, amongst the efforts of many others, we've created tools to help people. So right now, we all know that hours of service is a hot topic. We've created a truck driver version of what these changes mean. If you read the NPRM, which no fault to Joe and his shop that put this together, it's 129 pages long. You have to damn near have a PhD to understand it, and nobody's going to read it except for me, I think. So I lived in it for 4 days. But at the end of the day, we take that information and we put it in language that truck drivers can understand. It's important that you understand the issues so you can advocate for what you want. So we have created clarification tools. We've created an entire document that literally takes you step by step through the process of how to make a public comment. We have created templates to assist people in having conversations with members of Congress. We have a phone template if you want to call them. We have an email and a letter template if you want to write them. If you're going to meet them in person, we have something you can print off and leave them, in their office. And it's the absence of these kinds of tools that we feel drivers need so they can be their own best advocates.
That's fantastic, and thank you for doing that. I'd like to ask Michael Jenga, you not only were new to trucking in 2008, but you are an immigrant as well, right? So you've come into this and navigated this whole system and built a very successful company over a decade when longtime truckers are saying it's harder than it's ever been to make this work. So how have you come in and figured out how to navigate this system to go from 1 to 300 trucks?
Well, as an immigrant, what I did, personally, I had the passion for driving trucks. So what I did after college, I did logistics from University of North Texas, but I bought a box truck, started driving it around, worked for some companies, then acquired a CDL, drove it for about 18 months. But what I learned in college was important for me to be able to start a business and run one. So what I figured out while I was driving was just getting a feel of what it is to be a driver and living it. So, and that was around 2005, where it was just the big companies doing stuff. So when companies see, like what Andrea is saying about companies like TruckerNation, they've opened up our eyes on a lot of things because it gives you an avenue where you can express yourself and be able to express ideas that they're gonna be pushed forward. So that participation became very critical for people in the trucking industry. But having been a driver, then there's some certain things I was able to understand and be able to implement them in growing a company. Attracting drivers is it's not very easy because the pool is not as large. So you're pretty much competing with big companies, and they offer perks that some people are attracted to. But that said, then you just have to come up with other benefits around being a driver. So what we did was add value to the life of a trucker.
Well, we're transitioning into another question here, and I'll just go ahead and make that transition. You and I were talking before about your training process and how you train drivers. And I know that we've got some new rules out now on driver training, and I want to maybe move to that, and maybe you could introduce that discussion. You were telling me that your average driver trainer, one of the things that you offer is experienced trainers for your new drivers. And what's the average length of time that your trainers have on the job?
It's 10 years.
10 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I see some applause around the table. I know that out in the audience, you've probably just got a very, you probably got a lot of high fives. Let's talk about the new driver training rules. Those are still, those take effect in February?
Right, they're scheduled to take effect in February. There is a notice out right now about the possibility of delaying parts of that rule for a couple of different reasons. But the entry-level driver training rule, I think it's an important one. But everybody needs to not, I don't know how to say this exactly right, but when the government proposes something, any kind of rule that we have, it's a minimum standard, right? So the entry-level driver training rule was designed to provide a kind of a baseline, and also was written in a way to be flexible to allow a company to train those new drivers the way that they needed to. For instance, it provides a curriculum. What are the things that need to be covered? So every new driver covers the same things. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't say it should take you X number of hours to do that. That's a little bit of a point of controversy, but the reason why we do that is, I think everybody up here would agree, no two drivers are the same.
Sure.
Right? So you may have one driver, you know, Michael's probably got a guy that comes on and goes through the training program and on board and up to speed right away.
Right.
But then there's another driver that's going to need a little bit more time. So we just would say, listen, and the entry-level driver training rule is a rare beast when it comes to rulemaking, because it was done through not the process we're using with hours of service, the kind of notice and comment kind of pieces of it. It was done through what's called a negotiated rulemaking, which is literally exactly what it sounds like.
That was another piece of Andrea's work over here. And others.
She wasn't. Yeah,
No?
she's disavowing of that. But
Because the thing that I've heard around the floor is the piece that truckers, the independents, seem most concerned about is the aspect of the experience level of the trainers themselves, because they're saying that some of the big companies especially, and this is an instance where it sounds like the independents have had a strong influence in actually affecting the lives of the megas more than the other way around. So right now with the new rules, you're talking about minimum 2 years experience before you can train other drivers. Now right now there's no minimum experience required, right? To be a trainer.
There's not a standard. So under the entry-level driver training rule, the training schools will have to certify with us, certify their compliance with that regulation, all the things you talked about, as well as kind of what I mentioned in terms of the curriculum. And then a driver will then have to make sure that any new driver will be, you know, using one of the schools that has, you know, certified themselves to that standard. So it definitely creates, you know, a level kind of playing field and kind of, like I said, a baseline for what a new driver, you know, should have in terms of training. Ultimately, though, you know, it sounds kind of weird coming from me, the guy that's the regulator on the panel, but really the point that I impress most on people is exactly what I just said, is this is the baseline standard. You know, what you have to do in order to maintain safety in your company or for yourself alone is you need to make those decisions, and you need to be willing to kind of figure out what the right decision is for that driver or for that situation. Nobody up here that's involved in the industry is doing the minimum.
Well, but UPS
you know?
has already come out and told you they can't.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that, because that's a decision that needs to be made. But I think that there's a lot of components to this whole thing, and it's just, you know, this is where you have to, and again, kind of strange coming from the regulatory guy on the panel, you have to realize what the role of regulation is versus, you know, what, you know, responsibilities everybody has to kind of go above and beyond that. Like I said, nobody here is doing the minimum. Mike, I'm sure, does a lot more than the minimum maintenance on his truck. You know, I mean, he is not doing what's in the regulation. He's doing what's in the regulation and then a whole bunch of stuff beyond that. It's the same thing with driver training. It's, you need to figure out, you know, what it is that really, you know, it's kind of this, not to be kind of cliche about our roads are safe or anything like that, but it truly is everybody's responsibility to kind of manage the
Now,
process.
I know you've probably heard already from the folks at this table, but for the benefit of our audience, would anybody like to weigh in on, you know, is 2 years enough?
Looking at me for some
I am.
reason. You know, that's a difficult question because I feel like once again, as I said with hours of service, the 2020 training regs are a step in the right direction, right? The elevator is going on the upswing instead of the downswing as far as things like that are concerned. But, you know, as far as the 2-year thing goes, that's better than none. That's better than a lot of these big companies that you see out here, and when someone doesn't hit too many poles in a couple weeks, they're allowed to train someone else to drive a truck. You know, so I'll agree with the 2-year thing. I'd like to see at least 5, because I think at that point you've gone through enough winters and probably traveled around the country enough, going uphill, downhill, on the big hills and stuff like that, to have a good handle on what you're doing. But 2 years is better than nothing. You know, he talked about the any minimum of time or anything like that, and he's right. These are minimum standards, and anyone can go above and beyond. But when you're trying to push people through because you're training them to drive your own truck at your own company, and you have thousands of trucks, I don't feel like you're going to go above and beyond because these companies don't seem to care enough about their drivers in the first place. They treat them like an expendable piece of equipment, basically. And I think, in all honesty, when they were putting this together, I know that there was talk of 30 hours of behind the wheel time, and that doesn't mean like out in the parking lot backing up and doing maneuvers, but actual out on the road, drive down the highway, go through town, get some real on-road experience. And I don't think that 30 hours really was too much to ask because we're allowed to work 70 hours a week. That's less than a half a week worth of work for an everyday active truck driver. And a lot of people in this day and age, right? I started trucking 15 years ago when I graduated. I was a 3rd-generation driver. I knew what I was getting into, but back then, I feel since then to now, this industry has gone from a more generational type industry for people like myself to there's a lot of people in it that have been recruited by the bigger companies because of the economy diving years back and stuff like that and so forth, that now you're seeing a lot of people out here that have never been around anything like a truck before. So they really don't have that intuition or experience with them like I did from little on up, just being around them. And I don't think that you want to take someone, even though this guy that may be experienced says, hey, they seem like a good driver, when they took that trip around the block or whatever they have to do to satisfy their checklist, they could have got lucky. They could have not ran into any problems. They could have not missed a gear on anything, or anything like that. But I think, you know, there's no replacement for experience. And I think that where we really need to look at as far as these regs go and so forth, training's a big thing. And, you know, we're all about safety on the road. Like Tony said earlier, we have families driving up and down the road while we're out trucking. And I think that if you get someone a minimum amount of time, right, and make that the minimum, which goes along with what Joe said about this is the lowest standard, but that gives them 30 hours of driving a truck down the road with a trained, experienced instructor is going to put you in a position where you're going to run into the person that pulled further past the white line at the red light when you go to make a turn, or you're going to run into someone cutting you off, but you're going to have someone there that can see this and also teach you, hey, you handled that correctly, or hey, if you do that on this situation, you're going to end up with a real big problem. So I do feel there should be something like that in place.
Thank you. Andrea, I think you were giving me a high sign. You got something?
Yeah. I respectfully actually kind of disagree with needing a minimum number of hours. And here's why. Because I lived it. Not everyone is afforded the opportunity to grow up in a trucking community like myself or even a trucking family like myself, but we were. And my brother had been driving with my dad since he was this big. And, you know, if this driver shortage thing is real, let's just say it's real for conversation's sake here, you know, getting people, experienced people, or people who are good at the driving task and navigating, getting an 80,000-pound vehicle down the road safely, we would want to ensure that we could do that as efficiently as possible. And if there was a minimum number of hours, granted, what is potentially, or what had been potentially suggested was a very short number of hours, there's nothing that can replace both experience and proficiency. And having a proficiency-based system where a driver can go into training, prove proficiency on the components that are laid out in the new entry-level driver training rule would allow them to get into the seat quicker and be able to make money. So, my brother, for example, never took a day of training. All of his training was experience living in a trucking community and a trucking family. So he didn't go to a trucking school, nothing like that. He scheduled his DOT test, went and took it, and got behind the wheel of a vehicle after successfully passing the test the first time. So I believe in a proficiency-based system as long as there are equal levels of accountability moving forward with the new driver training rule, equal levels of accountability for the training, the training schools as there are the people that have to go through them.
Okay. Anyone, now, let me ask you, Mike, Jenga, you said your trainers have 10 years experience each. Is that just a function of your employment situation, or have you found that you need to have your trainers be extremely experienced?
No, partly the trainers had to come from driving a rig themselves. And the reason we did that was at least they can be able to relate to what's going on with the new trainees. So they are able to dispense more realistic information to the trainees. So what I do, I have about four trainers, and I pull them from driving. So the experience comes about. I mean, the value of having experience is that at least I know for sure these guys, they're going to be taught, the right things, not from the book, but just from exactly what compliance stipulates. Okay. So, I wouldn't, if we train drivers well, there's a high possibility that they're gonna be better drivers, because at that point, they almost, you're putting them in a situation where they're almost relating theoretically what might happen out there when they get out and to drive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, did anybody else have anything on that topic? We have about 15 minutes left, a little less than 15 minutes left. And I wanted to make sure that we've got any other topics on the table. I know that there are discussions still pending and open with the FMCSA on detention. I don't know if anybody had any burning issues regarding detention or any other issues that you want to put on the table while we've got an audience out there. Mike?
I was going to say, there's a lot we could sit here for hours, I think, and talk about different things that are on the table out there. But I think to add to what Andrea was saying with the proficiency thing, I'm someone that, just like her brother, didn't really would have needed the 30 hours of driving. But I do believe that fellows like myself and her brother are on a downward swing right now. And the proficiency system that we're dealing with, if you go out and drive down the road, obviously is not working very well. We attended the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee hearing about 2 months ago in D.C. We were invited to sit there and attend it and listen. And their opening statement was, why are we seeing this uprise in crashes out here with all this new technology we have to avoid it? And this is this is where I get my idea for wanting a minimum amount of time. The technology, I think they answered their own question when they asked that. Technology is not the answer for safer roads as far as I'm concerned. I feel like you could even take a 40-year veteran like Ingrid, who has a safe driving career, and put her in something and tell her, hey, this has this system on it and it won't let you hit anything. And over time, she's naturally going to become a little less conscious maybe of what she's doing. So you take someone that's never been around a truck like myself or Andrea's brother, train them very poorly, basically give them a license to kill themselves, and then put them in something where they think they're not going to hit anything. What do you think is going to happen? I really believe we need to get back to the basics, and we need to make sure that everyone is proficiently trained, but also there needs to be a minimum amount of time for certain things, because there's no replacement for repetition makes perfect if you're repeating it correctly. If you're not taught the correct way and you go out on the road and repeat it, we're going to have the same things we're seeing now, where people are running over telephone poles, and just the stuff we see on the daily on the road out here is mind-boggling. You didn't see that kind of stuff 15 years ago when I started driving, and I'm sure you didn't see it 40 years ago when Ingrid started driving. It's getting worse and worse, and I think what's happening is like, even with the ELDs and stuff like that, everyone's trying to find a way to make things safer after the fact and regulate those of us that are already out here doing the job. We need to start at the very beginning and teach these people that are driving the correct way, so we don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. Instead of waiting to see what happens and being reactive, let's make sure they're not to that point from the get-go.
Andrea, it seems like you've got something you wanted to add to that.
I can't disagree with the proactive versus reactive thing. I think it's so important as we move forward. But something I believe, both as someone who does what I do professionally and then do this on the side, I don't think that moving forward that regulations are the answer to all the problems we have in the trucking industry. Do we have a gamut of them? You betcha. Could fill this room with a bucket of problems. But at the end of the day, we cannot look to our regulators to fix every problem. They're limited in what they can and cannot do. But at the end of the day, I think the trucking industry needs to kind of buck up a little bit and do some self-regulating. We have the ability to say yes and no. Adam and Eve gave us that ability. You know, they bit the apple. So here we are with the ability to say yes and no. So, you know, self-regulation within the industry is a place where we're going to need to get. Are we turning the corner with getting regulatory assistance from our partners in FMCSA? You betcha, absolutely. But we're going to have to turn the self-regulation corner a little bit too, and ensure that we're exercising our right to say yes and no, and make good business decisions, and do things like Mike and his company does by having 10-year experienced drivers, or you know, setting a minimum on personal conveyance, or whatever the case may be. But you know, self-regulation, I think, is the next hurdle after we maybe make it past some of the hurdles that we've had with the agency in the past.
Joe, what do you think of that?
Hey, I'm all for that, you know. But I do think what she's saying, and maybe just a little bit of a different words, is I think consistent with what I was saying earlier, that you can't rely on a set of regulations to solve all of the problems. I mean, it's kind of a cooperative thing. The regulations set that baseline kind of for everybody, but everybody's operation is different. Mike's operation is different than Andrea's husband and her father, and everything is a little bit different. So I think that we have to figure out what are those things that we agree on, what are those things that need regulation. Okay, there's got to be some, you know, and then what are those things that can happen? Because I do think, you know, the big difference in safety is, you know, what do you do beyond that? I mean, you know, it's all of the things that we talked about here. So I think that whether it's more formalized voluntary programs, or whether it's just kind of what different companies do and how it works, I think it's all of those pieces. You know, when you look at what it takes to do safety, and an administrator said this, and some of us have looked at this for years. I mean, there's regulation and there's enforcement, and there's kind of outreach, and there's education, and there's training. All of those things have to happen together. That's kind of what gets you to the point of safety.
So what's around the corner? What are the regulations that we're not talking about yet today that are going to be the topics at this time next year?
Well, I'm hoping not too many others this time, because I hope we get some of these things done. I mean, I think that the focus and what we've talked a lot about at this show, for us from FMCSA standpoint, is Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. That particular rulemaking is one, I think actually it's one of those rare rules where almost everybody agrees it's a good idea,
And
right?
that's mandatory in January?
That's starting in January, that's right. And I think, my goal on that one is just to make sure that everybody kind of smoothly works their way into it and it kind of goes off as easy, because I think that's one that, closes a lot of gaps that the folks here in the panel and others are concerned about with new drivers coming into the industry without experience, or, in this case, it's focused on the drug and alcohol issues. And so for us, I think we're kind of focused on that and the entry-level driver training rule, as well as kind of moving forward with hours of service. But I think also everybody should not lose sight. There's a lot of other things on the horizon right now. I think there's a lot of what we would call smaller rules, but, on the deregulatory side, removing some of the requirements on paperwork for hiring folks and some of the other issues. But also, it's kind of like, hey, we all need to do everything, right? We need to look at kind of where we are and manage this process now, but we also do need to be looking down the road, because we also have, Andrea tells me all the time, she's kind of regretting what she asked for, the opportunities to comment. I gave you a lot of opportunities to comment on things. That's right. One of those is what happens with technology and what happens with autonomy in the future, and how does that impact safety and regulation. So, we're trying to kind of be like, hey, we got some things we got to deal with now that we think can help safety, and some things that kind of help from a deregulatory aspect, but also what's the future look like? Sure. When some of us are not here working with this anymore. I'm gonna put myself in your category too, just so you know. But
Wow.
Andrea's still around, and both Mikes are still around. What's it really gonna look like? And I think so. From our perspective, we're kind of saying, hey, where can we kind of ease some burden on the regulatory scheme? Where can we kind of take care of some of the gaps that we have? We're gonna with the clearinghouse, but also, what's the future look like? And things are happening really fast, and technology is changing really fast. And I think we all need to kind of be looking kind of out down the road and be thinking, what does it really look like?
All right. Coming into our last couple of minutes here, Ingrid, 30 seconds or less. Make your voice heard. What do you want people to know on their way out?
My heart and soul is still in safety. It's number one. I don't care whether we're sitting here with regulation or whether it's our families or whether it's whoever behind the wheel, whatever. I mean, that's number one. My biggest concern right now in the whole industry is training.
Okay.
Right now is training. That's
Good. Andrea.
So I'm the regulatory girl. I'm the girl that likes process, and I couldn't encourage any of the viewers or anyone in the room any more genuinely than I am now in saying, educate yourself, know the process, understand how to make your voice heard. It's not a hard, overly arduous process to do a little bit of research, educate yourself enough to feel like you can be effective when you have conversations with whether it's regulators or legislators. So I think it's important that we gain the respect of not only those that count on us not participating, but ourselves, because we are participating.
All right. Mike Jenga.
Mine is my participation is very critical as part of the small trucking companies. So the more you avail yourself to in these conversations, then it gives you a better chance to be heard on on what. How do you want to make your work environment a little bit more conducive? So, it becomes very important for everybody to just avail yourself and participate in these conversations with FMCSA, because that's the only way we can be able to achieve a cohesive environment for both parties.
Perfect. Mike Landis.
Yeah, as some of them have said, it's participation, I think. There isn't going to be just USTA or just TruckerNation or Alight or anyone else that's going to win this or make a difference. It's all of us all together. There's 3.9 million drivers out there. We need more than 5,200 comments on the comment period for this. But if you want change, you've got to reach out to people. Reach out to FMCSA. Reach out every week to your congressman or your representatives for your state or whatever like that. Because when we go to D.C., and we talk to them about something, they can say, hey, we've heard about that, and it's happened. You know, and I know not everyone likes the guys at FMCSA. We've spent quite a bit of time with them, and we always like to say we keep our friends close, but our enemies closer. But, you know, we're stuck with them. We're stuck with them to make a change in this industry, but now I like to say that they're stuck with us too. So here we are.
All right, well, that's all our time. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for participating in our first ever Boss 90 Exchange. And we call it the Boss 90 Exchange because we want people to have their voice heard. And at the Truck Boss Show, we make you the boss. I've got one piece of business to conduct here. Tomorrow in the Pride and Polish area upstairs, we're conducting Bossapalooza. Come on up for prizes and fun, and we'll love to see you there. That's from noon to 2 o'clock. Once again, I'm Brad Kuhn for the Truck Boss Show. Thank you, everybody. Bye.